stay tuned to find out how to create this lovely scene in watercolour. And there's a few watercolour techniques displayed here: wet in wet, wet on dry, how to do these windows and shadows, and how to create this fence effect. So off we go. Okay, so I have drawn out the scene and I've got the photograph here. I'll pop both of those up on my community page. What I first wanted to do is just to talk to you about artistic license. So in this photograph, these fence posts are far too big to create a nice composition. The house is also skewed a little bit too central. The rule of thirds means that house should be in that one of those thirds on that cross. So I've actually on my drawing moved the house over a little bit, and then I've also reduced the size of the fence post so it leads the eye into the house, so it's a focal point. As I go through, I'll talk to you about what colours I'm using. I have got some rose madder. I'm on the Saunders Waterford paper. I've got cobalt blue as well, so I'm just going to pop a little bit of water, about half a teaspoon, into both of those. You can use rose madder or you can use permanent rose, it's entirely up to you. So I've got that mix there. And the cobalt blue, so these are my colours for my sky. So I just want to make sure that they're fairly consistent. I'm going to dab a little bit of that blue into the rose madder because I want a purple, I want more of a purple. Okay, so a Saunders Waterford paper, it's a rough paper. I'm going to come down to the bottom of the tree line with some water. And I'm coming around the house. We're going to leave the house till later. If you can manage to get around your chimneys, excellent, leave those dry as well. I want you to come over your trees though. I'm going to show you a wet in wet technique for those. I've got my round number 10. Going to dip into my cobalt blue. Just create it's a circular motion. Start to create a lovely cloudy sky. You can come over the trees. You've got sky behind the trees. Come round the tops of your house and your chimneys. It's not the end of the world if you dab onto it. You can just dab it off with a bit of kitchen towel. Now I love a bit of purple in the sky. So we're going to dab into that. And again, circular motion. Wisp that through. I'm going to leave a few little bits of white. That's looking lovely. Okay, then I'm going to get a small flat. This is a 1 centimetre flat, and I have got 3 colours. Sap green, these are all neat. I've wet my brush, but then I've dabbed it off on the kitchen towel, and then I've got raw sienna. And what I'm going to do is dab in, upright and twist. So I'm getting a different angle every time. You'll have to keep reloading your brush. Sap green, then dab into a little bit of raw sienna. The good thing with a flat brush is you can see what you're dabbing into and how much you've got. So you know that you're getting a variety of strokes and different tones within that. Sap green, raw sienna. So you see there, look, sap green, raw sienna, 2 different bits. Now you need to move fairly quickly because this is going to dry, but you should have enough time to come all the way along and create a really nice soft tree line. Because the paint is thick, it doesn't move too far. We're using the paint Neat off the palette. I'm going to then dab into a little bit of ultramarine blue and sap green, so I start to get a different tone in here. Some of these trees can be a little bit darker. Just dabbing and then moving the brush. The movement of the brush just means that I'm creating a different brush mark every single time. So that sort of twist means I'm creating a little bit of a different brush mark. I've got some less dense tree here. This sort of bottom edge of the trees, you just want to make sure that the line isn't too smooth. It actually lends quite nice to be jaggedy and work quite nicely. Now as you come to the house, you've got a dry edge, which is perfectly fine. We can have a dry edge on the house. So I just want you to create a nice tree shape there. The beauty of this photograph is that the tree covers most of the house, so you haven't got to learn too much perspective. There's a little bit of perspective. It's nice for you to just get introduced to a little bit every now and again. Okay, so that's looking really nice. I'm going to dry that one off. Okay, so that's dried really nicely. What I've got now is a number 6 round. And I'm just going to wet the front of the house and the front side of the chimney. Then with a little bit of this purple, because I want this to be in shadow, I'm going to pop a bit of that purple on there. You don't want it to be too strong. You also want to hit the right side of the chimney on each of them, so the light is catching on the left side of the chimney. And then we're just going to leave that little bit to dry. I'm going to get my wash brush again and I'm going to come into the bottom section. So pop the water on. I'm going to come around the fence posts, but then wet the rest of the bottom section. Plenty of water. I'm going to pick up my round number 10. I've loaded it with water. I'm going to dab into the raw sienna and I'm going to take it directly on. So we're going to get a nice golden field in this back area. Load my brush up with water again, dab into a little bit of burnt sienna and again spread that through. That's just going to give a little bit more warmth towards the front of that golden field. Again, it just adds a little bit of a sense of distance. Load my brush up with water again and then I'm going to come into the sap green. I'm going to come into this front field. I'm going to come around these fence posts best you can. They can be rustic. If I dip into a little bit of the ultramarine blue, then I can spread, following the line of the land, some shadow. So that shadow is good to be here because it's going to be underneath the shrubbery, and then you can just take a few strokes through. Gives it a bit of variety there. I've got a slight bit drying, so to change that I'm going to add more paint. I've not got a brush that's loaded with water, I've just added a little bit more paint to the brush and then just gone on to that bit there. If you're loaded with water, then it will watermark. I'm going to swap down to a number 6. And we're going to do that same technique. Just create this shrubbery in the foreground. So this is going in with some sap green. So you can do this technique with a round and you can do it with a flat. A little bit more artistic license in comparison to the photograph here, because I've not taken the shrub all the way up, because I know that it works better wet within the field. As you get more confident with the techniques, you know how to work it, so it makes it easier on you. I'm just going to dip into some of the ultramarine. Just dab some of this through. So I haven't rinsed my brush in between. Naturally, the darker areas will come within the shrub and at the bottom of the shrub. So you can just pop those in. Unless you've got a darker shrub and then you want to make the whole thing a little bit darker. If you vary the pressure that you're applying with the brush, I'm going to dip into a little bit of the raw sienna as well. Lighter touches, harder touches, you'll get a variety of strokes. So in the same way that we twist with the flat to get that variety of strokes, we're just making a variety of strokes here. Okay, I'm going to dry that one off. Okay, so that's nicely dry now. What I'm going to do is take a little bit of the burnt sienna. So there's a dab of water. I'm using a round number 6 to do this. A little bit of the burnt sienna. A little bit of the ultramarine. The more ultramarine you take in, the more grey-black the mix will go. So that's a really nice grey. Just add a tiny bit more. Okay, so I've got a lovely grey there. Now if I zoom in so you can see the house a little bit better. I'm going to come straight on to dry. So I've dabbed into a little bit of burnt sienna, and that's burnt sienna with my round number 6 brush. And I'm going to come in and paint this on. So you've got to get a nice edge where your tree is, and you've got to cut in around the bottom of the chimney. So you just use whichever brush you're comfortable with. If you've got a smaller brush that you're more happy with, you can go down to that. Get a really nice edge on the top. Remember, that's going to be arching down there. You can take a really, really fine edge this side, because you can see a little bit of colour on the roof. Rinse that brush out, and then I can just dip into some of that grey. And we're going to add a little bit of dark just towards the bottom whilst it's still damp. And then I've dried my brush off, so I've rinsed it and dried it off. It is pretty much totally dry. What I'm going to do is lift out some light, so just lifting at the top, you get that nice area of light. If it starts to run back, it's because it's still a little bit wet, so you dry your brush off again and lift again until it stops running back, and it will stop. I've got my long thin brush now. This is a rigger. I'm going to dip into the burnt sienna, and I'm going to pop some chimneys on. So those chimneys are just there. Rinse that out, and then I'm going to dip into the grey. So the windows are really simple. Just going to come in and do 2 verticals there, and then the windows below are slightly bigger. So I'm going to go and create an R, a very flat R, but it's an R, or an upside down L. But an R or an L tends to work. Don't want to fiddle with them too much. And then I've got a round number 6 that's clean, slightly damp. I'm just going to touch each side and just wet the other side of the window. That way you get in the dark and a little bit of softening in for the light on that window, and it just works really well. If you really want to test your brush skills, you can come down the side of the chimney with a little bit of the grey as well, but that's not essential. So I'm just hitting the right side of the chimney there. Okay, so I'll zoom back out. Oh, that's in. Okay, so we're going to come down now and look at these fence posts. So I'll use my round number 6. I've got a little bit of water. Then I'm going to dab in to some raw sienna. So my brush was loaded with water as I've done that. It's giving me plenty of time. I can do 3 in one go because I'm fairly quick. If you wanted to do them one at a time, do them one at a time. I'm then going to take that grey mix, which was the ultramarine and burnt sienna, and come down one side. So when it's still wet, you're getting a cylindrical feel happening. So you just need to make sure it's nice and dark. I'm going to come down the dark side first. So we're going to do the dark side first, and then I'm going to come very lightly down the other side. So you're going to have less of the dark. You can even take a little bit across the top. Okay, I need a little bit of plastic card or something that I can indent with. I'm just rooting. When you need one, you can't find one. There's one. So I've got a little piece of plastic bank card, and I'm going to run that down using the indent corner to create a surface on the wood, so it's going to give that grain effect. It needs to be wet to do this, because the paint runs into the indent, and it really is quite effective. Then what you can do is use the flat of the card to arch and scrape out a little bit of light. It needs to be of the perfect wetness to do this. If it runs back, it's not quite at the right wetness and you need to wait and do it again. There was actually a little bit of blue paint on there, but it's added onto that. I'm now picking up my long thin brush, so this is my rigger, and we're going to add a few grasses to the front. So just going to rest on my little finger, and this is just a little bit of the sap green. Can build up some grasses. Now at this stage, less is more. Do not go mad. This is just giving you a bit of foreground interest to the composition. There's actually some nettles in the shot, and to do those I just do a little bit of a wiggle. So do the leaves first, start with a wider wiggle and then get it narrower. You just get a nettle effect there. There's also a few little thistles. You just paint a few bits in with the purple. Just don't be too precise. Different heights, different sizes. You can pop a few little bits on the top. I'm going to make sure I've got plenty of this grey. I'm going to do the barbed wire. I'll just dry this off. Okay, so that's nicely dry now, and I've got my long thin rigger, and I'm going to come in to create the barbed wire. So I'm using that grey, which is the ultramarine blue and burnt sienna, and I'm going to come along and create the line first. Now I'm just going to come all the way along, keeping it as smooth as possible. But the beauty of barbed wire is we can put the barb bits back on, and if you've broken the line, it works. So with the little bits of barb, I just want you to do a few flicks. Don't get bogged down, it doesn't have to be too precise. Your brain will fill in the rest of the detail. So just a little flick on the underside, a little flick above. Try to space them at different points as well, so you haven't got too much in one go and they're not looking too even. You don't want it to look too even. So two of them it comes over the post, one it goes behind. And there we go. So there we are. That's the finished article. So you've got some really interesting wet techniques, some wet on dry techniques, how to do windows, how to do the fence posts. Some really interesting techniques for you to have a go at. I hope you've enjoyed it. Please do like, subscribe. I do a tutorial every week. I'll pop another tutorial for beginners up here and a playlist for beginners just here as well. See you next time.